TPR.
Hello, I'm here where the previous intro was recorded, which I just recorded. This episode is the second of the two-part episode that I mentioned. If you missed the previous intro, if you're only here for this episode, Zeerak and I had a very long conversation about two very separate things. I took the second half of that conversation, released that as episode 177. This is pod 178 with Zeerak, again, of course, talking about his amazing Urdu, Arabic, Persian, that sort of script related keyboard project, Matnsaz, which was released towards the end of the previous year, 2022. We did a previous episode with Zira sometime towards the summer, maybe, where we spoke about the project initially. And now I want to talk to him, get like a follow up on how the launch went. We dive into a lot of details, again, revisit some topics around why this was important, what the challenges were, why this hasn't been done already. Great tidbit that he drops in there. People keep talking in Pakistan about how Urdu is going out of flavor, and people, the youth are not speaking in Urdu, not using Urdu for communication. It's all English. Zirik has a great idea in this, a great perspective in this, where he says it's not because people don't care about Urdu, it's because it's physically, technologically harder to use it, and how his keyboard is also aiming to fix that. It's helped for me, so I know it works. Yeah, so very interesting episode. Check out the previous one where we did a roundup of the 2022 Hamnawa music review, Pakistani music analysis, and then this one, which is all about his keyboard project, Matnsaz, hoping to revolutionize Urdu typing on iOS for now, coming on Android at some point. But yeah, great talk, great chat. Thanks again, Zira.
Capacity is becoming a limiting factor for me because मैं अभी development करता हूँ ना iOS simulator पे. Every iOS simulator is like 10 gigs. I did not know this before I started developer. And so अब एकदम से किसी ने कहा जी मेरे इस 2017 के आईफोन में नहीं चल रहा है. मैंने कहा चलो मैं सिम्युलेटर चालू करता हूँ इस OS पे 10 गिग उधर गए. तो अब मैं ना वो मैनेज कर रहा होता हूँ. I need to get rid of that old computer.
तो फिर great segue into the actual मौजू at hand. आपकी कीबोर्ड लॉन्च हो गई. प्लीज आप जरा बताएं. Firstly, summarize करें. What was the idea? If you haven't, Zeerak was here before. He's been here several times, but he was here on a dedicated episode about his keyboard project and other things. So this is like a follow-up to the keyboard project because it's finally out. तो हमने सोचा हम बात करें इस बारे में, how it went, how it's going. So yeah, Ji, what was the idea? Quick summary. Elevator yelling.
Okay. Quick pitch is that it's a new kind of keyboard for Urdu. Generally for the Arabic script overall, but for now just for Urdu. Where the idea is that we can compress the number of keys down from Urdu mein, there's like 39 letters depending on how you count. But so we compress that down to a 21 letter keyboard. And the way we do that is that instead of having every letter having a separate key, letters that have the same shape share one button. So be pe ka ek button hoga, dal ka ek button hoga, and then all of the diacritics, nukte, ऊपर छोटी छोटी तो जो हैं.
Oh, that's what they're called.
The software.
Diacritics. अच्छा.
Yeah. हाँ, एजाम उर्दू में बोलते हैं. अरबी में एजाम बोलते हैं, उर्दू में एराब बोलते हैं. नहीं, actually, no, I take that back. एजाम बोलते हैं. और एराब बोलते हैं उसको ज़ेर ज़बर पेश को.
Yeah, I knew the word.
So वो दो हैं.
तो मैंने yes कह दिया मैंने, but I was in.
Yeah, so that's one idea, which is that we compress it down, which means that you have bigger keys to hit, and the software adds the dots automatically. And what that does is it makes it easier to learn to type, makes it more accurate to type. And for people that have never typed before, उनको एक मतलब instead of कि आपको नजर आए और आपको कुछ समझ नहीं आ रहा कि keyboard कहाँ है. Like if you ever show an Urdu keyboard a parent or a child who has never typed in Urdu before, there is a kind of barrier where they're like, ये नहीं मुझे समझ आ रहा. This is not for me. So there's that barrier to entry is quite high. And so the idea is to reduce that barrier to entry by making it much simpler to understand and easier to learn to type on. And then what it also does is that it represents the cursive shapes of the letter. So Urdu mein, unlike in Latin script, the letters connect and change shape. And so the keyboard then represents the shape that the letter will take as you type it. So for example, choti or badi,
right.
If you type it, different shapes. Like एक में शोशा बन के नीचे दो नुक्ते डल जाएंगे और एक actually बड़ी ये बन जाएगी.
Right.
And so in the keyboard, when using Matnsaz, you can actually see कि ये होगा type करते हुए. So those are the two sort of main innovations, and then it ships with kind of custom autocorrect that if you're in iOS land, you've never seen before in Urdu. On Android, there's still a decent autocorrect that you can use. So iOS, then that's like kind of one big innovation also.
Right. I think in my understanding, I think the main game जो है ना सारी वो है autocorrect की. Because without your autocorrect library of words, which we spoke about, the many issues with finding words and how to build all of that, listen to the previous episode for this. But the main issue would be, the main thing that you're depending on is that there are words, firstly, that you're generally typing correctly, and the program is recognizing those words. So that library, I think, is the key thing, which is how dots वगैरह के लगाए, the app is able to figure out what word is being looked for.
There's two things here. The first is that this keyboard that I've designed would not have worked in a typewriter world.
Yeah.
Without software present, you cannot design this kind of keyboard.
Yeah.
तो उसमें तो ये होता था टाइपराइटर दुनिया में कि आपको स्वाद लिखना है ना, तो आपको बताना पड़ता था कि मैं स्वाद का जुड़ा हुआ हिस्सा लिख रहा हूँ कि मैं फुल स्वाद लिख रहा हूँ या एंड वाला हिस्सा लिख रहा हूँ. Those will all have different buttons, right? And so when we got computer world, हमने कहा स्वाद का एक बटन, and then the computer will figure out what shape to give it depending on where it shows up in the word. And now with the smartphone and touchscreen, we can do an extra step, which is that we can take lossier input and guess what word you are trying to type. So in this case, I say, just give me the shape of the letter you want to type.
Yeah.
And the reason I'm doing that is because it's easier to type it. और उसके बाद I can guess कि आपने नुक्ते क्या डालने हैं. And for the most part, that is right. And the reason that's right is because we built a custom kind of Urdu data set based on lots of like type Urdu that we have then increased the quality of, and then we learn from that, and then we start guessing what it is that you want to type. So say for example, आपने लिखना है ka या ga, both very common words. And so we have to guess when you're doing that based on what else you've typed. And so we can make those guesses in an educated fashion. And sometimes they'll be wrong, just as all autocorrect can sometimes, and all AI can sometimes be wrong, in which cases there are fail-safes, like you can manually type it and so forth. But for the most part, it should guess. And so in a pre-smartphone era, this was not possible. आप कर ही नहीं सकते थे. In a pre-sort of software-based era. So if there was no software in typing, you could never do this. So that's the kind of main idea. The interesting thing here is, अगर Chinese में देखें, in Chinese, Japanese, all these East Asian languages that have tons of letters or tons of characters that they want to type that cannot fit on a keyboard, they have never imagined typing without software.
Yes.
There was always, right? मतलब उन्होंने तो सोचा 60s वो कह रहे कि typing हो ही नहीं सकती software होगा. So we will actually give some sort of lossy input, and the computer will help us select what character we are going to type. Latin script में ये problem था नहीं, तो उधर उन्होंने software नहीं डाला typing का. कई साल typewriter चलता गया. That same paradigm shifted to computers with some autocorrect and grammar correction, but the main paradigm was similar. What we did wrong in the Arabic script world and in the Urdu world is that we attached ourselves to that Latin script as opposed to the Chinese idea, because there's, for various reasons, but the idea we took was कि अच्छा ये Latin paradigm पकड़ के आगे चलते हैं, when in fact the software enabled paradigms actually allow us to do lots of really interesting things, which we could never have done before. So that's sort of one angle. So you're right that the software is the key. The second thing to understand is that in a smartphone world, the software is key, period. The reason that is even on a standard English keyboard, the keys are too small to hit reliably.
Right.
Like if you look at it from a kind of user interface angle, the main tap targets that we gave, like for fat fingers, like if you're using a thumb, the weight, you can't hit those keys accurately at scale.
Right.
If you're typing like thousands of letters. And so the way that the iPhone keyboard originally worked, and people may remember this, when the iPhone keyboard came out, people were all like, BlackBerry ka keyboard ke bagair nahi hum reh sakte. You must have a hardware keyboard. And the whole way that they made it work is that the tap targets of the keys were not what you see. They would guess what letter you were going to type based on what letter was likely to appear. So aapne T or H likha hai, then they know that the E is the likeliest letter you're going to type. So as long as you type around the E, they knew that's what you were
typing.
There was
like I think in video games it's called like a hitbox, where it's not like you're not exactly in that area, but close enough. वो active frames को count करके, it'll help you sort of. Yeah.
And this shipped with the very first iPhone in 2007. उर्दू में अभी
Autocorrect.
तक नहीं है उसमें और I mean so they added like more and more versions like predictive and so you could see what it was thinking a little bit more later, but this idea that there was some autocorrect functionality built into the keyboard shipped in 2007. Urdu mein, because at least the iPhone doesn't understand Urdu very much. It knows some words that you typed before, but not really. That level of knowledge didn't come through, which means that typing on the keyboard with the same size of buttons is actually physically harder.
Right.
So
Right.
it's not some myth that people find it harder to type in Urdu. It's actually physically more difficult to do so. So
Yeah.
without that underlying software layer, this whole transition to smartphones is impossible. So yeah, it's critical. Like आप सोच ही नहीं सकते like बनाने का बगैर
Mm.
पीछे एक autocorrect या data set हो.
How did you decide on the layout? Which letter would go where? Did you take existing Urdu keyboards and sort of approximate those for reference? Yeah, make your own. Like वो लोग कहते हैं ना
So
QWERTY
I
QWERTY
thought
कैसे
about a
बनाना?
lot, and actually the um, the keyboard was designed initially for us to do lots of experiments, to try it out, to like find the optimal layout. So the way that keyboards are normally designed is QWERTY keyboard ki the history which people can read,
Yeah.
that some of it was just sort of path dependence that led us to where it is. The way that keyboard layouts are normally optimized is that you're doing a lot of simulation. Okay, which words are going to be faster to type on this sort of layout? You run it against a data set, and then you do in-person trials where you have one human type on a keyboard long enough to get past learning effects and then get to a competent stage, and then you measure them at the competent stage and you measure how long it takes for them to learn it. तो ओरिजिनली ये सोच के ही बनाया गया था कि हम इस तरह की बहुत सारी वो करेंगे एक्सपेरिमेंट्स. जो गोइंग उर्दू कीबोर्ड्स हैं उसमें 2-3 टाइप्स हैं. एक मशहूर टाइप है जो आजकल पाकिस्तान में सबसे ज़्यादा चलती है, which is a mapping to QWERTY, which is that letters in Urdu that sound like their
Right.
English equivalents are placed right on top of it. Most
Right.
people that use this keyboard, I'm not sure most is the right term, but many people that use this keyboard do not realize that this is how it is mapped.
So basically what we're doing is कि आपको it's such a convoluted thing कि उर्दू बोलने वाले लोगों को इंग्लिश सीखने की इतनी आदत हो गई है कि they're used to an English keyboard, तो उर्दू कीबोर्ड आप वैसे ही बना दें, like layout
Right.
wise.
And the other more problematic thing about it is कि जिसने उर्दू कभी टाइप की नहीं, वो उसको आप assume कर रहे हैं कि एक almost you need to have some layer of English competence for this to make sense.
Yeah.
Right? Which is in a world, so we are at this point where a lot of people now refer in the tech industry to this like next billion users concept, which is that we have so many people on the internet already, but we are expecting 1 more billion users to show up on the internet, people that have never been technologically connected in that way before. Most of these people are likely to be from Asia and Africa.
अच्छा.
And they will not be primarily English speaking. So Google का एक बड़ा unit है, which they call like next billion users, which is focused primarily on this type of innovation. उन जैसे लोगों के लिए जो उर्दू बोलते हैं या कोई और ज़बान बोलते हैं, anything that is smaller and not as represented online on the internet, having these like Latin assumptions baked into technology is problematic and kind of upside down. So we need to start undoing them. So yeah, तो ये QWERTY mapping तो बिल्कुल ही एक odd situation है, but a lot of people are used to it, so it makes sense to support it, to continue. The other thing that is kind of interesting is a lot of like Arabic script keyboards have other layouts जिसमें common चीजें home row पे हैं, जैसे alif, kaf, ये वो, but then letters that are similar shapes are always grouped together. So swad,
अच्छा.
even though they will have varying frequencies, might be together because you expect to find them. And so that has become a kind of more legible keyboard layout. So when I was designing the sort of compressed keyboard layout, the idea was to just lay it out with that similar ethos. And so it's primarily alphabetical, alif se ye tak. And because the letters of a similar shape are grouped together anyway, so alif, be, dal, jim, ye wale sab letters ek hi row mein aa rahe hain. And then in our testing, we found that the layout was not prohibiting people from typing fast. So we've continued with it. There's a few other alternate layouts that you can try. And we can experiment.
In the thing, you have other options.
Yeah. So in Matnsaz, if you're, for example, used to a QWERTY mapping, you can use it. If you want to use like an alphabetical keyboard, जिसमें अलिफ से ये तक बे पे तक के अलग-अलग बटन है, वो भी आप इस्तेमाल कर सकते हैं, same autocorrect. Or you can use the new compressed layout. And then over time, we can think about other experiments as well, if we get time to try to run it. But for the moment, it's...
And these different keyboards are not a challenge for the backend software to parse, right?
No, it's built to just it was built with that intention in mind, that multiple of these were. Like if I'd built it another way, it might have been a challenge, but for the moment, it's just our autocorrect, it has this understanding built in. So it's a sort of new kind of autocorrect where it looks at matches at various layers. So it says a basic shape match ho raha hai, nukte match ho rahe hain, zer zabar pesh match ho raha hai. And so with that new level of kind of autocorrect technology, we can actually take any kind of input and give you better predictions. So more layouts, lots of layouts are in there already, and more can be experimented with as time goes on.
Shape wali baat again reminds me of Chinese, Japanese languages and the pictographic sort of they use. Because like I've been mentioning, मैं अभी Japan गया था, and फिर obviously Japan जाके one thing that happens to people is maybe I should move to Japan, and you're like अच्छा कैसे होगा? Because वो हम process में end तक हम पहुँचे ना पहुँचे process के बारे में सीखना बहुत ज़रूरी है. So one of the things was the proficiency you would need with the Japanese language, speaking verbally, whatever, wo to hai hi. But this writing thing is so specific that there is a specific number of words, like 80,000 words, to get the top ranking. You need to know the shape of those 80,000 words. Those letters का तो scene ही नहीं है ना कि आप खुद ही बना लेंगे. You need to memorize those shapes of those 80,000 words that are considered to be like business proficiency. And I remember यहाँ पहली दफ़ा मैं तो इधर ही एशियन लोगों से रब्ता इधर ही हुआ था आयरलैंड आके, एंड आई हैव चाइनीज़ कॉलीग्स, और वो अपने उस पर वीचैट वगैरह पे लगे होते हैं यूजिंग देयर वो autocorrect keyboards, or it's more like they're not even trying to spell it, they're trying to literally just get to that shape, lossy output,
because you can't spell it actually. So
and you can't.
In most character-based languages, there is no alphabet, right? Which is a hard concept to understand if you are not familiar with character-based languages. The idea is, so in an alphabet-based language, the way that the word is written tells you how to pronounce it. So just Latin में आपको पता है अगर there's a word that is B-O-X, B is a B sound, O is an O sound, and X is an X sound. And so you will look at it and figure out how to pronounce it. In ideographic languages or logographic languages, I'm not sure what the technical term is, the word is basically a picture depicting the word. You cannot look at it and know how to pronounce it. You must know that yourself. And actually, a lot of typing technologies in East Asia were built around reverse engineering a system of breaking down each of the characters into underlying core components. पर आप कह सकते थे कि अच्छा भाई ये 6-8 लाइनें मिला के हम ये कैरेक्टर बनाते हैं, ये 6-8 लाइनें बना के हम ये कैरेक्टर बनाते हैं. When in fact the languages themselves don't have any inherent system breakable like Lego-like structure कि आप उनको तोड़ लें.
You can't break down the word into letters. Yeah.
Right. And so all of those, as far as I understand, ways to break down the characters into like code bricks that you could put together and build any character, or approximations, and sort of reverse engineered as opposed to inherent to the language itself. Arabic script may actually there's a sort of wonderful layering to it where there is that level of building block. जैसे आपको पता है कि बे पे ते के जो कोर शेप है उसके बाद आप नुक्ते डालते हैं. So नुक्तों का एक separate layer है. And so if you go from Arabic to Farsi to Urdu, we use the same basic shapes, but हम थोड़े से नुक्ते ऊपर नीचे change कर देते हैं. And so जैसे base से आपने पे करना है तो हमें पता है कि 2 नुक्ते और डाल लें. So it's the same core bricks, but you're adding a little bit of more components. और अब आपने vowelization sound डालनी है ज़ेर ज़बर पेश से कि आपको पता चल जाए कि इसका किस तरफ direction है लफ्ज़ की जब आप लिख रहे हैं. And so there's sort of core components there as well. So Arabic has the Arabic script has so many kind of built-in layers that's sort of very artistic about it. And so the idea for the keyboard actually comes from those layers itself, which is because the shapes are different from the dots, which are different from the Arab on top, we can actually separate those 3 layers in the keyboard. And that's where the design of the keyboard is sourced from.
So speaking of the keyboard itself, अभी थोड़े देर से पहले क्या हुआ था कि Zeerak and I ran into each other in Manchester. So what happened was quickly हम बैठे, and within 10 minutes like I was like ये तो live podcast शुरू हो गया इन दोनों का. तो वो मैंने बात वहाँ रुकी, but what I wanted to continue was how was the rollout, and in that you mentioned that your dad has been using it for like a year or something.
More. So this the whole thing has been in development for about 5 years. The sort of workable build where people can actually use it and type on their phones, I think, has been, I want to say, out for um, 2.5 years. So for 2.5 years, I think I've had multiple hundreds of people have it on their phones, use it every day. And so they're finding like bugs, edge cases, and so forth. And we've been fixing the language model as well, improving our data set, aista aista. And so of those multiple hundreds of people, there's some primary beta testers who have been there from the beginning, including my father, who is very, very pointed in his feedback about his Urdu typing. So it's वो उसके बगैर ना हो पाता, like this sort of thing where you have so many different edge cases where the language can go so many different ways. Without hundreds of people testing it for this long, it doesn't get to this point. And part of doing the work was, we could have launched it 2 years ago, right? The reason I didn't is because part of the problem with sort of Pakistani technology or Urdu technology as I see it is that we settle for halfway there or like poor quality because it serves a function that you couldn't see otherwise. कि आप उसके बगैर कर नहीं सकते, चलो low quality बना लेते हैं. And I think that really turns people off and pushes them into adopting Latin technology or other technology. Like if you get crappy Urdu software, kids are more likely to learn to type in English. And so part of the ethos of doing this project was, can we build high quality world class level software? यानी कि आपको iPhone पे इस्तेमाल करते हुए लगे मत कि आप कोई non-native keyboard इस्तेमाल कर रहे हैं. And so I went to great lengths to get colors, shapes, in sort of different modes, exactly as close to a system level keyboard as possible, so that if you're switching from the English keyboard to this Urdu keyboard, the space key is exactly where your thumb would expect it, by pixel. And so it took a long time to make sure that level of finesse existed everywhere, so that there is no barrier. Ideally, you should not notice that this level of detail has gone in. The only way you do notice is if you use like a bad keyboard and the spacebar is like 10 pixels off where you expect it, and your thumb is going and it's not working.
Which
so
is
that
actually
should not happen.
coincidentally, this is happening abhi sort of in a way with Twitter, क्योंकि इनका मर्दों ने view count डाल दिया, and every time I go to hit the button that I think is retweet, it is actually reply. तो अब reply खुल रहा है, and I'm like, retweet क्यों नहीं हो रहा?
I've retweeted a bunch of things that I expected to heart.
हाँ, वो और आगे चला गया. It's yeah, khair. But acha, but then this year, earlier this year, there was the official launch
almost exactly a month ago. So November 15th this year, it officially launched. So you can now get it on the App Store on your iPhones and iPads.
So how big was the addition of users that came through?
Launch was good. So like multiples from the original kind of beta test. And so I'm sure there's some people still on the beta test. So good launch. I kept it like intentionally like not super big, primarily because it was going to go to a number of other devices that we haven't found. So I know there's one lingering bug that on some older iPhones, the keyboard crashes. And I've been trying to figure it out for a long time. And in fact, I have an really old iPhone that I use only for this purpose, on which it does work. But newer iPhones than that older iPhone are crashing for reasons I don't quite understand.
Right.
It's been good. We got lots of bug reports. जो ठीक किए हैं. So for example, like people using their device in zoom mode, where you can actually get the screen to act like it's a smaller size screen, so the buttons are bigger. So lots of people with decaying vision will use their iPhones in this way. For some reason, none of my like 500 beta testers, 400 beta testers had used this mode.
Yeah.
And so we had never come across it. So lots of quick fixes. So there are a lot of quick fixes over the last few weeks. But hopefully it's in like really good usable state now, unless you have an unlucky iPhone 8, in which case just know that I am aware and working on it.
Right.
So it's been a good launch. Hopefully we'll get to more people soon, get people's feedback and do it more widely, because I think my focus has been kind of US where I'm based and Pakistani yahan pe, but there's lots of people across the world that are typing in Urdu, in the UK, in India, that also have iOS devices. So the goal is to start getting to as many of those folks as possible.
Any unexpected regions जहाँ install हुआ था, we were like, अच्छा यहाँ भी लोग उर्दू में बात करना चाहते हैं?
Germany, like sort of up there for me. Like US, UK, Pakistan was expected. Germany was up there. I didn't expect there to be like a kind of German kind of contingent of Matnsaz users. It's really exciting. But yeah, I think it's with 200 million people, you're going to be everywhere. So I guess if the surprise is on us.
Yeah. Okay. Any major next steps already planned for the rollout?
There's a few different features. that I hope we can push through in the near future, like a few kind of basic iOS things. But the goal primarily is to improve the language model as much as we can. क्योंकि उसमें, the way that our data set is built is that we took about 6 million words from 3 different publications that we then fixed typos over many years to build our data set, and that data set is open source and ready for people to use. But उसमें भी अभी भी कुछ errors हैं जो कभी कभार propagate हो जाती हैं. So if you land at like some odd collection of letters, sometimes you'll see like a word being suggested. And so the idea is to start building a more error-free data set, so that even those things that you rarely see no longer happen. And then eventually we want to turn it into a way that you can have a more canonical dictionary of words with diacritics and so forth built in. Tabhi hota hai ki suppose you're writing the word maslan, Matnsaz will put in those zabar automatically because it knows that it's essential to the pronunciation of the word, and that's how it's normally written. लेकिन अगर आपने लिखना है इस या उस case में,
you don't really need
usually the way we write it, it's not completely clear, and so in writing there's a bit of ambiguity. And so getting to a point where you can be that specific about how you want to type, especially for students, like that's really a feature that I'm interested in and I've talked to people about. So if we can get to that, that'd be great. But that's a sort of multi-year effort that will require us basically annotating our entire data set with diacritics, and then learning from that. So I hope we can get there at some point. But that sort of is for me the kind of gold standard feature. कि आप लिखते लिखते आप उसको कह दें कि भाई हाँ on कर दो ज़ेर ज़बर पेश या off कर दो, or keep it somewhere in the middle where you want some but not the others.
How many words of those 6 million though would there be where the zer zabar pesh are so key to the word?
So it depends. Like खड़ी ज़बर जहाँ भी आ रही है,
हाँ,
usually it's key. और वो आमतौर पे लिखा होगा.
But like as a percentage, surely we're not looking at like 50%.
Percentage is pretty small, but I think like what the feature I'm describing is sort of a little bit bigger than that, which is like if you're learning to read Urdu, you want them everywhere. जैसे हम कुरान पढ़ते हैं पाकिस्तान में, उसमें हर चीज पे ज़ेर ज़बर लिखा होता है, and so you want to have the ability to be able to put all of them or none of them depending on your preference. And at the moment, what we can do is type in the ones that are normally written, which gets us 80% of the way there. But that last 20% is really hard, but also really interesting. Which is if you can get to that point where every letter is clear and disambiguated, and you can turn it off or on. So you could imagine, for example, you go to a newspaper website, and it shows you the common ones, but then you could say, no, show me everything. And it does as an option, which would be amazing as a sort of teaching situation. Or for example, if you were to like double tap on a word that you don't know, not only does it show you the meaning, but also like the pronunciation with the zer zabar pesh.
Right.
So like that level of features, I think, gives us a big ability to like a big jump in terms of teachability. So that's kind of what I want to go to, because we found some really interesting attributes happening because of the autocorrect. अब होता ये है कि अब मुझे पता नहीं कि ते डलता है या तोय डलता है लफ्ज़ में, ठीक है, या जे डलता है या जाल डलता है. But as you're typing, the autocorrect will fix those sorts of errors for you. And as a result of which, actually your Urdu begins to get better, because Urdu in the and other words in the Arabic script, other language in the Arabic script are built around this system where words are built off of 3 core letters, और उनको हम जोड़ के हम आगे लफ्ज़ बनाते हैं. So once you figure out the 3 core letters in a word, you can figure out all other words that are related to it, and now you learn to spell them also. And then you can figure out the source of the words depending on what the root of the word is, what 3 letters make up the root of the word, and then suddenly your language vocabulary has increased, not just from the one word that you just learned to type, but into like the 6 or 7 or 8 words that also share that same core root. And so that corrective learning ability is actually much more powerful than I expected. So that's been one of the learnings from the test, which I'm actually quite excited by.
No, I was thinking of this for my own self, because my hesitation to use Urdu would be ke ye te toye ke masle ho jayenge. But then in my mind, I was like, acha, if the app is correcting those words, तो then it'll sort of reinforce. मैं भी देख तो रहा हूँ ना कि क्या लिख रहा है वो, ऐप क्या लिख रही है, app is मुज़क्कर, and then I'll know what the word should be.
Right.
perhaps just by
And
seeing.
with predictive, like you can also, आपको मतलब मुहावरे, common phrases you begin to understand as well. Like even मुज़क्कर मुअन्नस, right? आपको नहीं पता कि का है कि की. आप काफ लिखेंगे, then the likely word will appear right after. And
Right,
so
right,
you
right.
actually begin to type much better language with better typing tools, which I think is also an interesting learning, which is part of the reason why everybody's saying that language, why is the language dying? आजकल के बच्चे interested नहीं है. No, the answer is
Yeah.
much simpler. It's
Yeah.
just harder
Yeah,
to get
yeah,
it right.
yeah, yeah.
And so we will all go to something that is more convenient, and it is much more convenient to type good English than it is to type good Urdu.
Or even
And so if we
decent
just
Urdu.
make it or decent Urdu, right?
Yeah.
And people are much more offended by it also. Like people are much less offended by bad English than they are by bad Urdu.
Yeah.
I think. And so or at least people are much more embarrassed by it if you type bad Urdu
नहीं
and
वो
चले जाए.
बैगेज है
So
ना, कल्चर छोड़ दिया अपना, और आज के बच्चे और अगर मिडिल क्लास ट्विटर डिबेट्स,
right.
बट या.
And so for me, like if you can type with this to your grandmother, right? You can text your grandmother every now and then and get that sort of feedback. Then it gives you a lot more confidence to like write an Urdu blog post, write an Urdu status. Like your ability, like I've noticed this with myself and people that have been using it, is that their barrier to want to type something in Urdu is decreasing. Some of it is like that it improves their language. Some of it is that it's actually like convenient, won't crash when you type it. Easier to use. There's like not that many kind of learning barriers. And so that encourages people to try other things and get into other parts of the language. So for me, that's a really interesting transition and will be fun to see play out over the next like year.
Two questions about this. One, I think I asked you at the time also, but chat में भूल गया. Does the library contain slang words? गालियाँ हैं उसमें. बहुत अहम हिस्सा of communication, but वैसे sincerely also.
Not a lot of slang. That's actually one of the weaknesses of the data set. So the way we built the data set is that we were careful. Okay, we could scrape like Twitter scrape कर लेते ना, Urdu सब Twitter पे scrape कर लेते. But Urdu की इतनी गलतियां आम हैं, even in like good published texts, कि वो सारी गलतियां propagate हो जाती हैं. So the core was, let's start somewhere where we at least think the grammar is correct.
Right.
कि spelling कुछ हद तक ठीक होगी, grammar कुछ हद तक ठीक होगी, but typing की गलतियां कि भी space गलत डला हुआ है, वो हम ठीक कर सकते हैं.
Yeah.
So primarily the places we got from were like 2 scholarly journals and 1 news website was where our data set is built from, which means that there's not that much slang. But it also means that when you're doing conversational text, like somebody texted me the other day, कि भाभी का लफ्ज जो है वो autocorrect हो रहा है, which it really shouldn't because it's a common word. So those sorts of things we need to go fix. And the reason for that was primarily that starting from a more scholarly standpoint gives us a better, more reliable autocorrect system, and then we can start putting in the more common slang words. So no, if you swear, it will not know it automatically, but if you teach it, it will remember, but won't tell anyone.
Right.
So
it is in the future,
it is a good friend.
There is a gali patch incoming in the future.
Gali patch.
GP.
Matnsaz gali patch. $3 only.
Acha. And the other thing was Android. When is that? Is that somewhere on the roadmap? Yeah.
No date to announce. Obviously, I know that most Urdu users are on Android. Most Urdu users, at least in this country, are on Android. I am a one-person development shop, so I can start with one platform at a time. The reason to start at iOS were primarily that it has the worst keyboard, but also because as a market, it tends to be much more open to newer apps. So Android is on my radar. I don't know.
Would it not have been?
Achha,
I thought you would also have chosen iOS because there are some standardization measures across devices, Apple ecosystem.
There are, but there's so many of them actually that is not really as much of a selling point anymore. So for me, like what I have to do on Apple devices, that for each device, I need to make sure that it is like handcrafted to fit to that device. Because that is the expectation of the keyboard, right? If you're using an iPhone 13, then your spacebar on Matnsaz should be the exact place that the spacebar and the backspace keys are on your regular keyboard. So I go into every device and I make sure that that is correct. On Android, because there is an underlying acceptance that it will be, there's so many device sizes.
Yeah.
There is the way that you would design the keyboard would be much more programmatic. where you would actually like look at the size of the screen and then lay those keys out, where I don't do that on iOS because that would lead to some imperfections that make it harder to use. So I don't know if it would have been easier or not. But I think, yeah, definitely it's something I'm aware of and thinking about.
Okay. Anything else that you want to talk about, Matnsaz related, जो कि हमने ना mention की हो?
No, I just want people to give it a shot, try it out, and let me know where things go wrong. I am very my support channels are very responsive,
Right.
by which I mean my Twitter and Instagram accounts. And the thing I like to do most is if it doesn't know your name, I add it in, because I think I've noticed one of the things that people do the most the moment they get the keyboard is like one of those things that only user test would reveal.
Right.
That the first thing they try to type is
Write their
own
name. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Which makes total sense once you know it, but I
Yeah.
would not have predicted going in.
Huh.
So I've been very careful now to get as many names into it as possible, and so I have a lot of people writing in, maybe like, "Acha, mera naam dal denge, ye lafz theek nahi hai, aise dal dein," which I really like. So that level of engagement is still there. So I want to hear from people, and I'm very open. So that'd be my one request. Which is if you try it, no matter what you think, just email me.
My uncle question would be any new names that you had never heard of before that have come your way. Because ये बड़ा होता है ना आजकल नाम बड़े अजीब से आ रहे हैं लोग. This is a common uncle auntie complaint. अच्छा ये क्या नाम रख दिया? अच्छा.
You've seen all these like new reels, which is like naming a boy in the 70s.
Yeah. Yeah.
मतलब अब तो ये पॉइंट आ गया है कि बच्चे बूढ़ों के नामों का मजाक उड़ा.
Yeah.
So no, I have not heard new names yet, but I have scraped many Urdu baby name websites to get my list, which are very interesting. So if you are interested in some retro websites, I recommend this Google search. It's quite good.
I remember once, I don't know how I got my hands. I was very young, and I got my hands on like a baby name book, और लड़कियों के नाम में बे से बिजली. I was like, this is the name? It was in the book. I was like, what? अच्छा चलो.
Okay, अब book में है तो फिर तो must be real. Let's do a Facebook.